They asked how long Marines trained. Sergeant said, 13 weeks. Then we give them guns and explosives. The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the largest room Ambassador David Yoon had ever seen. It stretched for almost a mile in every direction. The ceiling was so high that clouds actually formed near the top. Thousands of alien beings sat in floating platforms that circled around a central stage. Each platform held representatives from a different species. Some looked almost human. Others looked like nothing David had ever imagined, even in his wildest dreams. David stood alone on the central stage. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had been a diplomat for 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Earth had just made first contact with alien life 6 months ago. Now, humanity was asking to join the Interstellar Coalition, a group of 47 species that had been working together for thousands of years. The High Counselor of the Assembly was a being called Veth. He belonged to a species called the Melodians. They had run the coalition for 6,000 years. Veth was 12 feet tall with pale blue skin that was almost see-through. David could actually see 3 hearts beating slowly inside his chest. Veth had 4 arms and eyes that glowed with soft golden light. Veth raised 2 of his arms, and the entire hall fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was deep and powerful. Special machines translated his words into English for David to understand. Ambassador Yoon, Veth said, "Your species is asked to join our coalition. This is a serious request. All member worlds must contribute soldiers to our unified defense fleet. Before we can accept Earth, we must understand your military capabilities." David nodded his head respectfully. "Of course, High Counselor. I am happy to answer any questions. Tell us about your primary fighting forces. What do you call them?" David thought for a moment. Earth had many military branches, but he decided to talk about the one he knew best because his own nephew had just finished training there. "We have several branches," David said, "but one of our most respected forces is called the United States Marine Corps." A quiet murmur went through the hall. The aliens were curious about this new species and their strange military names. Veth's military advisor was a Melodian named Commander Thren. He was smaller than Veth, but still very tall by human standards. He pulled out a glowing tablet and began taking notes. "These Marines," Thren said, pronouncing the words slowly and carefully. "They are your elite warriors?" "They are one of our elite forces, yes," David replied. "Interesting." Thren looked at his tablet. "And how long do these Marines train before they are sent into battle?" "Our honored warriors train for 15 of your Earth years before they see their first combat. Some species train for even longer. The Brevians require 20 years. The Korthik require 30. David felt his stomach tighten. He suddenly understood that his answer was going to cause problems. But he was a diplomat, and diplomats did not lie. He thought about his nephew, Tommy, who had just finished boot camp at a place called Paris Island in South Carolina. Tommy had called him last month, excited and proud to finally be called a Marine. 13 weeks, David said simply. The silence that followed was the most complete silence David had ever experienced. For a moment, he wondered if the translation machines had broken. Then he realized that every single being in that massive hall was staring at him. Thousands of alien eyes, all focused on the small human standing, alone on the stage. Then the hall exploded with noise. Aliens shouted from their platforms. Some were angry. Some were laughing. Some were making sounds that David could not understand at all. The Brevian delegate, a creature that looked like a giant beetle made of metal, was clicking his mouthparts together in what seemed like mockery. Commander Thren stood up so fast that his platform shook. 13 weeks? Ambassador, this must be a translation error. You cannot possibly mean that you send soldiers into combat after only 13 weeks of training. There is no error, David said calmly. He had learned long ago that staying calm made other people listen. 13 weeks of basic training. Then we give them guns and explosives. The Brevian delegate made more clicking sounds. The translation machine turned them into words. This is absurd. This is a joke. Our militia, our lowest level of soldiers, trains for 3 full years. 3 years! And you send children with 13 weeks into battle? They would be destroyed. They would be slaughtered. David kept his voice steady. With respect, sir, our Marines have never been slaughtered. They have fought continuously for over 250 years. They have been hurt. They have lost individual battles. But the Marine Corps has never, not once, failed to complete a mission when they had proper support. More shouting filled the hall. David could see that most of the aliens did not believe him. Why would they? Their entire understanding of military training was based on years and decades of preparation. The idea that humans could create effective soldiers in 13 weeks seemed impossible to them. High Counselor Veth raised all 4 of his arms. Slowly, the hall became quiet again. His golden eyes studied David with new interest. Ambassador Yoon, Veth said slowly, your words are difficult to believe. We have fought wars for thousands of years. We have learned that proper training takes time. Much time. The idea that effective warriors can be created in 13 weeks goes against everything we know. I understand your doubt, High Counselor, David replied. I can only tell you what I know to be true. Our Marines are not perfect soldiers after 13 weeks. No one is perfect. But they are ready to fight. And they are very, very good at what they do. Veth leaned forward on his platform. His 3 hearts beat a little faster, visible through his pale skin. Then perhaps, Ambassador, words are not enough. Perhaps a demonstration is needed. David felt a chill run down his spine. He had a feeling that things were about to get very interesting. Far above the planet, orbiting in the darkness of space, a human ship called the Unzinshin floated silently. On board that ship, a group of Marines had been watching the entire meeting on a video screen. They had heard every word. Sergeant Major William Park was the oldest Marine on the ship. He was 52 years old with gray hair cut short and a face covered with scars from old battles. He had been a Marine for 33 years. He had fought in wars that most people had forgotten. He had trained thousands of young men and women to become warriors. When he heard the aliens laugh at the idea of 13 weeks of training, he did not get angry. Instead, he smiled. Well, he said quietly to the Marines around him, it looks like we might get a chance to educate these folks. Corporal Amy Song, a young woman with short black hair and sharp eyes, looked up from cleaning her rifle. You think they're going to test us, Sergeant Major? I'm counting on it, Corporal, Park replied. His smile grew wider. I'm definitely counting on it. The chaos in the assembly hall continued for several minutes. Ambassador David Yoon stood quietly on the central stage, waiting for the noise to die down. He had dealt with difficult meetings before, but nothing quite like this. The aliens were not just surprised by what he had said. They were truly shocked. Some of them looked at him like he was crazy. Commander Thren, the Melodian military advisor, finally managed to bring some order back to the hall. He floated his platform closer to David, studying the human with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Ambassador, Thren said, let me make sure I understand correctly. You take ordinary humans, civilians with no military experience, and in 13 weeks, you transform them into soldiers ready for combat? That is correct, David replied. And these soldiers, these Marines, they fight against trained enemies? Enemies with years of experience? Yes, and they win. Most of the time. Thren shook his head slowly. His species showed confusion by tilting their heads to the side, and right now his head was tilted so far it almost touched his shoulder. How? Thren asked. How is this possible? What secret do you possess? David thought about how to explain. He remembered watching his nephew train. He remembered the phone calls, hearing how tired Tommy was, how hard the training pushed him. But he also remembered the pride in Tommy's voice when he finally graduated. It is not a secret, David said. It is simply how we are. Humans are adaptable. We learn quickly when we must. And our training is very intense. In those 13 weeks, our recruits do not sleep much. They do not rest much. They are pushed to their limits and beyond. Those who cannot handle it wash out. Those who remain become Marines. The Brevian delegate made his clicking sound again. Pushed to their limits? Every species pushes their soldiers. That is nothing special. But limits take time to reach. Time to expand. You cannot compress years of development into weeks. It violates basic principles of learning. Perhaps, David said calmly, humans have different limits than other species. This comment created a new wave of murmuring in the hall. David could tell that many aliens found his suggestion insulting. They had thousands of years of military history. They had fought countless wars. Who was this new species to suggest they were somehow different? Up on the Inchin, Sergeant Major Park watched the conversation with growing amusement. Around him, 10 Marines from 2nd Battalion sat in the ship's common room. They had been assigned as a security detail for the diplomatic mission. None of them had expected to become the center of a galactic argument. Corporal Amy Song put down her rifle and crossed her arms. They really don't believe we can fight, do they? Would you believe it? Park asked. If you had trained for 15 years and someone told you they could do the same thing in 13 weeks, you'd think they were lying too. Private First Class Tommy Lee spoke up. He was the youngest Marine in the group, only 19 years old. He had finished boot camp just 8 months ago. His face still had some of the softness of youth, but his eyes had already changed. They had the sharp, aware look that all Marines developed. I didn't believe it either, Tommy said quietly. When I started boot camp, I thought there was no way they could teach me everything in 13 weeks. I thought maybe we just learned the basics and figured out the rest later. And? Park prompted, and I was wrong. Tommy shook his head at the memory. By the end, I knew things I never thought I could know. I could shoot, fight, think, work with my squad. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. When they handed me my rifle and called me a Marine, I understood. The training doesn't teach you everything. It teaches you how to learn everything else. Fast. Park nodded with approval. That's exactly right, Private. That's the secret these aliens don't understand. We don't create perfect soldiers in 13 weeks. We create Marines. Soldiers who can adapt. Soldiers who can learn. Soldiers who can figure out any problem, any situation, any enemy. Lance Corporal Danny Kim looked up from his tablet, where he had been reading about the different alien species in the Coalition. Sergeant Major, it says here that the Melodian honored warriors spend 5 years just learning hand-to-hand combat techniques. 5 years on one thing. And how long did you spend on it, Kim? About 3 weeks total, spread through boot camp and follow-on training. And could you take one of them in a fight? Danny thought about it seriously. Hard to say, Sergeant Major. They're bigger than us. Stronger, probably. But they fight according to rules and patterns they learned over 15 years. Same moves, same responses, everything perfect and practiced. He smiled slowly. I fight dirty. I fight to win. I use whatever works, Park pointed at Danny. And that is why 13 weeks is enough. Because we're not training you to fight perfectly. We're training you to fight effectively. There's a big difference. Back in the assembly hall, the argument was getting more heated. Several species had joined the Brevians in mocking the idea of 13-week training. Others were more cautious, pointing out that humans were a new species and perhaps operated by different rules. High Counselor Veth had remained silent through most of this, watching and listening. Now he raised his forearms again to quiet the hall. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This debate serves no purpose. Words cannot prove or disprove the ambassador's claims." He turned his golden eyes toward David. "Ambassador Yoon, do you truly believe that your Marines are capable warriors? That they can fight alongside species with decades of training?" David stood up straighter. "I do, High Counselor. Without any doubt. Then let them prove it." Veth's voice carried weight and authority. "The Coalition has a testing ground. We call it the Crucible of Valor. Many species use it to prove their warriors' worth. Your Marines will face this test. If they succeed, your claims will be verified. If they fail..." He let the sentence hang in the air. David felt his heart beat faster. He did not know what this crucible involved, but he knew the stakes were high. Earth's membership in the Coalition might depend on this test. "I will need to consult with my military personnel," David said carefully. "Of course. You have 1 hour to decide." On the engine, Sergeant Major Park was already on his feet. He had heard everything through the video feed. His blood was pumping with a feeling he knew well. It was the feeling he got before a mission. The feeling of purpose, of challenge, of being exactly where he was meant to be. "Captain Cho," he called to the ship's commander, "I need a shuttle to the surface. And tell the ambassador we accept the challenge." Captain Julia Cho, a Navy officer with 20 years of experience, raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this, Sergeant Major?" "We don't know anything about this crucible yet." Park smiled his old warrior smile. "Captain, I've been a Marine for 33 years. I've done every hard thing this universe has thrown at me. Whatever these aliens have planned, my people can handle it." He turned to his squad. 10 Marines looked back at him with eager eyes. They were ready. They had been ready since the moment they earned the title. "All right, Marines," Park said. "Time to show the galaxy what 13 weeks can do. Get your gear." The room erupted in movement as the Marines prepared for the greatest test of their lives. 1 hour later, Sergeant Major William Park stood in the assembly hall next to Ambassador David Yoon. Behind him, 9 other Marines stood at attention. They wore their combat gear and carried their weapons. Every alien eye in the massive hall was focused on these 10 humans who had accepted the challenge. High Counselor Veth looked down at them from his floating platform. His golden eyes moved slowly across each Marine, studying them carefully. These were the warriors who claimed that 13 weeks of training was enough. These small, soft creatures who lived on a planet at the edge of the galaxy. Veth had lived for over 1,000 years, and he had never seen anything quite like them. "Sergeant Major Park," Veth said, "before we begin, you should understand what you face. The Crucible of Valor is not a game. It is a true test of warrior capability. Some who attempt it do not survive." Park did not flinch. "We understand, High Counselor. Do you? Let me explain the test." Veth waved one of his forearms, and a holographic image appeared in the center of the hall. It showed a mountainous landscape with sharp peaks, deep valleys, and thick forests. Rivers cut through the terrain like silver snakes. The whole area looked harsh and unforgiving. "This is the testing ground," Veth continued. "It exists on a moon 3 hours from here. The environment is hostile. The temperature changes from burning hot to freezing cold. The wildlife is dangerous. And there are other challenges hidden throughout the course." Commander Thren stepped forward to provide more details. "Your squad of 10 warriors must traverse 80 kilometers of this terrain. Along the way, you will face simulated combat against battle drones programmed with advanced tactics. You must also locate and rescue a target, a weighted dummy representing a fallen comrade, and carry it to the extraction point. Park nodded. This sounded similar to training exercises he had done many times on Earth. Difficult, but not impossible. The time limit, Thren continued, is 72 hours. If you fail to reach extraction within that time, you failed the test. If any of you warriors are too injured to continue and no evacuation is called, they must be carried. Leaving a comrade behind is automatic failure. We don't leave Marines behind, Park said simply. Ever. Thren showed something that might have been surprise on his alien face. The current record for completing the Crucible was set by our Melodian-honored warriors. They finished in 61 hours. These were veterans with 15 years of training. No other species has come within 10 hours of that time. The Brevian delegate made his clicking sound from his platform above. The Brevians completed the Crucible in 70 hours. And we trained for 20 years. These humans with their 13 weeks will be lucky to finish at all. If they survive. Park looked up at the Brevian with calm, steady eyes. I guess we'll find out. On the Incheon, Captain Cho had arranged for a live video feed of the entire test to be broadcast to the assembly hall. Every alien in the coalition would be able to watch. This was not just a test anymore. It was a show. It was a chance for humanity to prove itself on the galactic stage. The Marines boarded a shuttle and flew to the testing moon. During the 3-hour flight, Park gathered his squad together for a briefing. He had studied the holographic map carefully and had already formed a plan. Listen up, Park said. I know you've all done hard things before. Boot camp, infantry training. Some of you have seen real combat. But this is different. The whole galaxy is watching. Every alien out there thinks we're going to fail. They think 13 weeks of training makes us weak. They think we're jokes. The Marines' faces were hard and determined. Not a single one showed fear. We're going to prove them wrong, Park continued. Not by being perfect. Not by doing things the way they expect. We're going to prove them wrong by being Marines. By adapting. By overcoming. By never giving up, no matter what. Corporal Song raised her hand. Sergeant Major, what about these battle drones? The aliens said they're programmed with advanced tactics. Do we know what kind of tactics? I spent the last hour studying their military databases, Park replied. The drones are programmed with Melodian combat patterns. Very structured. Very precise. Lots of formations and coordinated movements. Beautiful to watch, probably. Sounds predictable, Lance Corporal Kim said with a small smile. Exactly. They spent 15 years learning to fight a certain way. They do it very well. But when something unexpected happens, when the battle doesn't follow their patterns, they have to think. And thinking takes time. Time we won't give them. Private Lee shifted nervously. He was the youngest in the squad and had the least experience. Sergeant Major, what's my role going to be? Park looked at the young Marine carefully. Lee, you're going to do what Marines do. You're going to watch, learn, adapt, and fight. Don't worry about being perfect. Just do your job and trust your training. Lee nodded, trying to look confident. Inside, his heart was pounding. 8 months ago, he had been a high school student worried about grades and girls. Now he was about to represent his entire species in a military test that could change humanity's future. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. But then he felt Corporal Song's hand on his shoulder. You've got this, Lee. Remember what I told you? Your training is good. Trust it. The shuttle landed at the starting point of the Crucible. A barren plateau of gray rock stretched out before them. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against a purple sky. 2 suns hung low on the horizon, one red and one white, casting strange double shadows across the ground. A holographic timer appeared in the air above them, counting down from 72 hours. The moment it activated, the Marines moved out. They fell into formation automatically, without needing orders. Point man in front, scouts on the flanks, main body in the center, rear guard watching behind. It was a patrol formation they had practiced hundreds of times taught in the assembly hall. The aliens watched with curiosity. The humans moved well, they had to admit. Their formation was efficient. But so what? Formation marching was basic. The real test would come when they faced combat. Commander Thren studied the video feed with professional interest. They move quickly, he observed. Perhaps too quickly. They will tire themselves out. High Counselor Veth said nothing. He simply watched with his ancient golden eyes, waiting to see what these strange creatures would do. On the moon, Sergeant Major Park set a brutal pace. He knew that speed was their advantage. The aliens expected them to move carefully, to conserve energy for the long journey ahead. Instead, the Marines practically jogged across the terrain, eating up distance with every step. "Stay hydrated," Park ordered. "Eat when you can. We're not stopping until we hit the first objective." The first objective was 20 kilometers away. Most species reached it in 8 to 10 hours. Park planned to do it in 5. Behind him, Private Lee felt his legs burning. His pack was heavy. The strange gravity of the moon pulled at him differently than Earth. But he did not slow down. He did not complain. He just kept moving, one step at a time, following the Marine in front of him. This was what 13 weeks had taught him. Not just how to fight, how to endure, how to push past pain and exhaustion and keep going when everything in your body screamed to stop. The aliens might not understand it. They might think it was impossible. But Tommy Lee was living proof that it worked. And he was just getting started. 40 hours into the crucible of valor, the aliens in the assembly hall had stopped laughing. They had stopped making jokes about 13 weeks of training. Now they watched the video feeds in stunned silence, trying to understand what they were seeing. The human squad had already covered 60 kilometers of the most difficult terrain on the testing moon. They had crossed frozen rivers, climbed sheer cliff faces, and pushed through dense forests filled with dangerous wildlife. They had done all of this while being hunted by battle drones, programmed to attack without mercy. And they had not lost a single Marine. The first drone encounter had happened at the 12-hour mark. 40 drones, shaped like floating spheres with multiple weapon attachments, had ambushed the squad in a narrow canyon. The drones were programmed with Melodian assault tactics. The same tactics that had conquered dozens of worlds over thousands of years. Sergeant Major Park had studied those tactics for 3 hours on the transport to the assembly. Just 3 hours. But that was enough. They're going to try to pin us down with fire from the front, Park had told his squad before the fight. Then they'll send flankers around to hit us from the sides. It's textbook Melodian. Beautiful and predictable. When the attack came, the Marines did not do what the drones expected. Instead of taking cover and returning fire, Park ordered an immediate assault directly into the drone formation. It was crazy by any standard military doctrine. You don't run towards superior firepower, but Marines are not trained to follow standard doctrine. They are trained to win. Private Lee had been terrified as he charged forward, his rifle barking in his hands. Plasma bolts from the drones streaked past his head, close enough to feel the heat. But he kept moving, kept firing, kept doing exactly what his training had taught him to do. Find cover, fire, move, find new cover, fire again. Never stop moving. Corporal Song and Lance Corporal Kim had circled around the flanks, hitting the drones from angles they were not programmed to defend against. The drones tried to adjust their formation, tried to respond to the unexpected attack pattern. But by the time their processors calculated new firing solutions, the Marines had already moved again, 90 seconds. That was how long the fight lasted. 40 advanced battle drones, destroyed in 90 seconds. 0 Marine casualties. In the assembly hall, Commander Thren had stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "That's not possible," he had whispered. Those drones were programmed with master-level combat algorithms. Algorithms developed over centuries. Ambassador Yoon, who had been invited to watch the test, had allowed himself a small smile. "Commander, your algorithms are based on predictable patterns. My Marines don't fight with patterns. They fight to win." Now, 40 hours in, the squad faced their biggest challenge yet. The rescue target had been located, a weighted dummy representing a fallen comrade, hidden in a cave system deep in the mountains. They had to retrieve it and carry it 30 kilometers to the extraction point. And according to their scouts, at least 100 more battle drones waited along the route. Sergeant Major Park's knee was screaming with pain. It was an old injury from a deployment 20 years ago. The cold air and constant movement had made it worse. Every step felt like someone was driving a nail into his joint. But he showed no sign of it to his squad. A leader does not show weakness when his people are watching. Corporal Song had twisted her ankle in the first hour of the test. She had simply wrapped it with tape and kept going. Now it was swollen to twice its normal size inside her boot. She did not complain. She did not slow down. She was a Marine, and Marines do not quit because of a little pain. Lance Corporal Kim was running a fever. A small cut on his hand had gotten infected despite the harsh environment. The combat medication in his kit kept the fever under control, but he was not at full strength. Still, when Park asked if he could continue, Kim just nodded and said, "I'm good, Sergeant Major." They retrieved the dummy from the cave. It weighed almost 200 pounds, designed to simulate carrying a wounded comrade in full gear. Park had planned to rotate carriers, switching every kilometer to spread the burden. The Private Lee stepped forward. "I'll take first carry, Sergeant Major." Park looked at the young Marine. Lee was the smallest member of the squad. The dummy weighed almost as much as he did. "That's a heavy load, Private." "I can handle it, Sergeant Major." There was something in Lee's eyes that made Park pause. It was determination, pure and simple. The same determination that had gotten Lee through boot camp. The same determination that defined every Marine who had ever earned the title. "All right, Lee. First rotation is yours." They moved out, Lee carrying the dummy on his back. The weight was crushing. Every muscle in his body burned. But he thought about what this moment meant. Every alien in the galaxy was watching. They thought humans were weak. They thought 13 weeks was a joke. He would show them. He would show them all. The next drone attack came in a forest of purple trees that twisted toward the strange sky. This time, there were 60 drones, and they used different tactics. Instead of a frontal assault, they tried to surround the squad and close in slowly, tightening the circle like a noose. Park recognized the pattern immediately. It was a hunting formation used by the Brevians. The drones had adapted, using tactics from a different species to try to catch the humans off guard. "They're learning," Park muttered. Then he smiled. "Good, so are we." He split his squad into 3 fire teams. The first team, led by Corporal Song, broke through the eastern part of the circle with a concentrated assault. The second team provided covering fire, keeping the drones focused on the center. The third team, just 2 Marines, slipped out through a gap in the western perimeter and circled around to hit the drones from behind. It was not a tactic from any manual. Park had invented it on the spot, based on what he saw in front of him. Adaptation, improvisation, the core of Marine training. The battle lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, 60 drones lay scattered across the forest floor. The Marines had suffered minor injuries, burns and cuts from near misses, but nothing serious. Nothing that would slow them down. In the assembly hall, the Brevian delegate had gone completely silent. His hunting formation, perfected over 20 years of training, had been defeated by creatures with 13 weeks of experience. He did not understand. He could not understand. It went against everything he knew about warfare. High Counselor Veth watched with growing fascination. These humans were not fighting with technique or precision. They were fighting with something else, something harder to define. Every time the drones adapted, the humans adapted faster. Every time an obstacle appeared, they found a way around it. They did not follow rules. They made their own rules, moment by moment, decision by decision. Interesting, Veth said softly. Most interesting. On the moon, the Marines pushed on. 20 kilometers to go. The two suns were setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. Soon it would be below freezing. They had no cold weather gear beyond their standard uniforms. They would have to keep moving to stay warm. Private Lee still carried the dummy. He had refused to give it up when his rotation ended. His body was breaking down, every muscle torn and burning, but he would not let go. The other Marines had offered to take over. He refused them all. "I've got this," he kept saying. "I've got this." And somehow, impossibly, he did. One step at a time, one breath at a time. Carrying a weight that should have crushed him, Lee moved forward through the darkness toward the extraction point. 32 hours remained. The finish line was waiting, and the whole galaxy was watching. They finished in 44 hours. The extraction point was a flat clearing on top of a mountain. When the 10 Marines walked out of the tree line and stepped into that clearing, they had been awake for almost 2 days straight. They had covered 80 kilometers of the most hostile terrain in the galaxy. They had destroyed over 200 battle drones. They had carried a 200-pound dummy for the last 30 kilometers, and they had beaten the Melodian record by 17 hours. Private Tommy Lee was still carrying the dummy. He had refused to give it up, even when his legs had started shaking so badly he could barely walk. Corporal Song had finally convinced him to let her help by pointing out that Marines never abandon their wounded, and right now, Lee himself was the wounded one. Together, they had carried the dummy the last 5 kilometers, one on each side, step by painful step. When they crossed the finish line, Lee collapsed to his knees. The dummy rolled off his back onto the ground. For a long moment, he just knelt there, breathing hard, his whole body trembling with exhaustion. Then he looked up at the sky, at the strange purple clouds and the distant stars, and he smiled. He had done it. They had all done it. In the assembly hall, the silence was absolute. Thousands of aliens stared at the video feeds, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The Melodian record, set by warriors with 15 years of training, had been destroyed by humans with 13 weeks. High Counselor Veth descended from his floating platform. This was extraordinary. The High Counselor had not left his platform to greet anyone in over 200 years. But this moment deserved special recognition. A shuttle transported Veth to the moon's surface. When he arrived at the extraction point, the Marines were sitting in a loose circle, drinking water and tending to their injuries. They looked terrible. Their uniforms were torn and dirty. Their faces were covered with cuts and bruises. Several of them could barely move. But when they saw the High Counselor approaching, they all stood up. It took effort. Lee needed Song to help him to his feet. Park's knee almost buckled beneath him. But they stood, because that is what Marines do when a dignitary arrives. Veth studied them with his ancient golden eyes. 12 feet tall, with pale blue skin and 3 hearts beating visibly in his chest, he towered over the small humans. He had lived for over 1,000 years. He had seen countless species rise and fall. He had watched civilizations crumble and new ones take their place. but he had never seen anything quite like this. "Sergeant Major Park," Beth said, his voice carrying weight and respect. "Your performance was unprecedented. In 6,000 years of the Crucible's existence, no one has ever completed it so quickly. I must ask you something." Park straightened his back despite the pain. "Yes, High Counselor. Is 13 weeks truly sufficient to produce warriors such as these?" Park was quiet for a moment. He looked at his squad, at the faces of the men and women who had followed him through hell. He thought about everything they had been through, not just in the last 44 hours, but in the months and years before. Boot camp, infantry training, deployments, losses, victories. All of it had led to this moment. "High Counselor," Park said finally, "let me ask you something. How long does it take to train one of your honored warriors?" 15 years, as I mentioned. "And in those 15 years, how many actually complete the training?" Beth hesitated for just a moment. "Approximately 30%. 30%. Park nodded slowly. "We start with 100%. In 13 weeks, maybe 20% wash out. They're not failures. Most of them just weren't ready yet. They come back, they try again, and most of them make it eventually." He paused, choosing his next words with care. This was important. This was the whole point. You train for 15 years because you're trying to build perfect soldiers. Soldiers who know every technique, every formation, every tactic. And your soldiers are very good. I'm not saying they aren't. Park gestured to the battlefield behind him, scattered with destroyed drones. But we don't try to build perfect soldiers. We can't, not in 13 weeks. Instead, we find people who are already soldiers, deep down inside. People who don't quit. People who fight for the person standing next to them. The 13 weeks just brings that out. It shows them who they really are. "Adaptation," Beth said slowly. "Improvisation." "Hard," Park corrected him. "The will to keep fighting when everything says you should stop. When your body is broken and your mind is screaming at you to give up and you just keep going anyway. You can't train that into someone in 15 years if it isn't already there. And you can't train it out of a Marine in a lifetime." Corporal Song stepped forward. She was supporting Lance Corporal Kim, who was shaking with fever but still standing. "Permission to speak, Sergeant Major?" "Go ahead, Song." She looked directly at Beth. There was no fear in her eyes. No nervousness, just honest determination. "High Counselor, I've been a Marine for 4 years. Before then, I was a college dropout working at a grocery store. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know who I was." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "The Marine Corps didn't make me into something new. It showed me who I already was. Someone who doesn't quit. Someone who fights for the people next to her. Someone who keeps going when things get hard." She looked at Kim, then at Lee, then at the rest of the squad. "We all found that in ourselves. 13 weeks didn't create it. It just brought it to the surface." Private Lee took a shaky step forward. He was still exhausted, barely able to stand. But he wanted to speak. He needed to speak. "High Counselor," he said quietly. 8 months ago, I was a high school student. I played video games. I worried about tests. I had never done anything hard in my entire life." He straightened up as best he could. "Then I went to boot camp. And in 13 weeks, I learned something. I learned that I was stronger than I ever knew. That I could do things I never thought possible. Not because the training made me strong, because the training showed me I was already strong. I just didn't know it." He gestured at the dummy lying on the ground behind him. "I carried that thing for 15 kilometers. It weighs almost as much as I do. A year ago, I couldn't have done that. But I did it today. Because I'm a Marine. And Marines don't quit. Veth was silent for a long moment. His 3 hearts beat slowly, visibly, as he processed everything he had heard. In 1,000 years of life, he had learned many things about many species, but he had never encountered a philosophy quite like this. Finally, slowly, he bowed. It was a deep bow, a bow of genuine respect. His species had not offered such a bow to another race in centuries. "I believe," Veth said as he straightened, "that the Coalition has much to learn from humanity. Not about how to fight. We know how to fight. But about the nature of warriors themselves." He turned to address the invisible audience watching through the video feeds. His voice carried across the galaxy. "Earth's membership in the Interstellar Coalition is approved, and I personally invite Sergeant Major Park to address our military academy to explain how his species creates such warriors in 13 weeks. Park actually laughed. It was a rough, tired sound, but it was real. "Happy to, High Counselor? But I'll warn you, the secret isn't something you can put in a manual or teach in a classroom. It's about choosing the right people, giving them a purpose bigger than themselves, and trusting them to figure out the rest." He turned to his squad, exhaustion finally showing clearly on his face. But there was pride there, too. Pride in what they had accomplished. Pride in who they were. "Marines," he said, "we're done here. Let's go home." The response came in unison, 10 voices speaking as one. It was a sound that had echoed across battlefields for over 200 years. A sound that meant something deep and powerful to everyone who had ever earned the right to say it. Ura. Ambassador Yoon, watching from the assembly hall, felt tears in his eyes. His nephew was standing there among those warriors. Tommy Lee, the kid who used to ask him for help with homework. The young man who had joined the Marines on a whim and found his true self in the process. 13 weeks had started that journey. Courage and heart had finished it. And now, the whole galaxy knew what humanity was capable of. The Marines boarded a shuttle and flew back to the Inchin. Behind them, the purple sky of the testing moon faded into the darkness of space. Ahead of them lay a new future, a future where Earth stood as an equal among the stars. They had proven something important today. Not just about military training, about the human spirit itself, about what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to give up. High Counselor Veth would remember this day for the rest of his long life. He would tell the story to future generations, the story of the humans who conquered the Crucible with only 13 weeks of training. But to the Marines, it was just another mission complete, another job done. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new obstacles, new tests, and they would face them the same way they had faced everything else. Together, adapted, unbroken. Marines.